So welcome the Office of Programs to Enhance Neuroscience Workforce Diversity, or OPEN, within the National Institutes of Neurological Disorders and Stroke is pleased to welcome you to the Open Stage monthly webinar series. This is a targeted outreach effort for our diverse neuroscience community to learn about NINDS programs and network with NINDS program staff. So each webinar will feature a different NINDS program, division, or cluster with the goal of increasing the representation of diverse groups in our portfolio. This month, we are excited to have with us the NINDS Small Business Program, who will speak on NIH support for biomedical researchers in small businesses. This webinar will include a panel of NINDS grantees from underrepresented backgrounds who have secured NIH funding for their small businesses. So before I pass it on to the small business team, we just have a few housekeeping items. Thanks. So few meeting reminders. All attendees are initially going to be muted. Please submit questions using the chat function. And a reminder that this meeting is being recorded and will be transcribed and archived on our website. You can enable closed captioning under live transcript. So that's at the bottom of your screen. And this meeting, again, will be transcribed and recorded. So details about where to find that archived version will be posted on social media and our listservs. So please do stay connected with us and feel free to email us if you have any questions about the webinar series. So thank you. With that, I'll pass it off to Taryn to get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and then we will get back into the presentation. Okay, so the first panelist is Rachel Dreilinger. She's a biomedical engineer and entrepreneur and a member of the Navajo Nation. She has 23 years of experience in engineering, product development, consulting, startups, lab automation, robotics, DNA synthesis, and medical and surgical device development. She's currently co-founder and CEO of a neurosurgery device company, NeuraMedica, Inc., managing all aspects of commercialization, including business development, fundraising, operations, IP, engineering development, market research, and sales and marketing. Oliver Graudejus is the founder of BMSEED. He developed the technology underlying the business at Princeton University. Francisco Lopez is the Chief Technical Officer at BMSEED and was originally a diversity supplement under Oliver's grant. He oversees the manufacturing of SMEA as well as the development of new modules for their SMEAs. Anna Moreno is the CEO and co-founder of Navega Therapeutics. Her company focuses on developing fully human epigenetic gene and cell therapies for neurological disorders, including pain. Before founding 1910, Jen Nwankwo worked at the intersection of life science, technology, and business. Prior roles include management consultant at Bain & Company, director of business development at the health tech startup, and drug discovery stints at Novartis and Eli Lilly. During her PhD research, Jen was an HHMI predoctoral fellow at the medical schools of Tufts University and Harvard University. So thank you so much, our panelists, for being with us today. And we will go back to the presentation. Oops, apologies. Okay. So while you're inside academia, it might feel like there's only one path to get funding and research support, but we are here to tell you that there is research funding outside of the R01 path. In your academic career, be that undergrad, graduate school, postdoc, or faculty level, if you have an idea or product with commercial potential, meaning it could be profitable, we are here to tell you that the NIH, the CDC, the FDA, and the Administration for Community Living specifically wants to support that type of work. And not only do we want to support it, but Congress has set aside a specific pot of money available to small businesses. Of that money, $1.2 billion goes to NIH to support research from small businesses. There are two mechanisms to support small businesses: the Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIR, and the Small Business Technology Transfer, or STTR. There are two key differences between these two pathways. One is that in an SBIR, you are allowed to have a research partnership with an academic institution or a contract research organization, while in an STTR, it's required that you collaborate with a nonprofit research institution. The second difference is in an SBIR, the PI must be primarily employed by the small business, while in an STTR, the PI can be employed with a small business or the research institution. So that lends the STTR pathway to investigators that are interested in pursuing a small business while remaining in academia. And as they mentioned in the introduction, we're representing NINDS, so we want to show you a snapshot of our mission space. It's very broad, a very broad bucket, including therapeutics and research tools related to basic neuroscience and its diseases. We have a $77 million set aside specifically dedicated to funding small business research within the NINDS mission space. And it does not support R01 applications. So what does the funding pathway look like for a small business? So in a phase 1, these studies are focused on proof of concept. They have budgets between $300,000 and $700,000, lasting for 6 to 24 months. And some examples of what would go into a phase 1 might be an efficacy study, lead compound development, or device benchtop testing. After that, you can move into phase 2, which look at prototype and product development, with budgets closer to 2 to 3 million over 2 to 3 years. There are specific requirements for investigational drug and device approvals at the FDA, and phase 2 can be more focused on studies that move you and your product towards regulatory approval. NIH doesn't support any products in the phase 3 where you're achieving commercialization, but there are additional mechanisms between the phase 2 and commercialization that we can support to bridge the gap from NIH funding to investor funding. So what do you need to have in order to apply for an SBIR or STTR? Well, you absolutely have to have an idea with commercial potential and sound scientific premise. You need proof of concept experiment or experiments. You have to have a legally formed for-profit company. And there are 6 required company registrations, which you can learn about at the website listed on the slide. It's also good to have a space identified. You don't necessarily have to have it like leased or purchased. And also to note that you don't have to have your own wet lab space. It could be an office space designated for your small business. For example, some STTR applicants propose to use wet lab space available at their university with their university partner and don't have their own. Collaborators and others that are willing to join your team if funded is also very good to have in your application. Okay, so you might be ready to think about applying for an SBIR or STTR, but you don't know what to do. Great news. The Small Business Education and Entrepreneurial Development, or SEED office, oversees small business across all of NIH, and they have a lot of great resources available at this website here. The first one, oh, you can't see that. There we go. And they also have an entire page dedicated to resources for entrepreneurs from underrepresented groups. So if you're considering this path, I can encourage you to check it out. I also included our NINDS SBIR website, which has lots of useful resources, as well as our budget and timeline guidance that I mentioned earlier. And no matter what type of grant you're applying for, you should always contact a program staff directly with a draft specific aim page so they can confirm your project fits their institute's mission space or help point you in the right direction. As submission deadlines approach, calendars fill up, so expect a 4-week lead time for scheduling a call. One of the most helpful services available to potential SBIR or STTR applicants is our applicant assistance program. This program is designed to help small business applicants that have not received prior NIH funding. Selected companies receive free application preparation support. And to apply for the AAP program, you don't have to have all your company registrations done. And this is something you work on during the program. If anybody is at the stage where they're considering it, the next application for AAP opens on April 25th. And our support to companies doesn't end with funding. So once you have your SBIR or STTR funded, there's more support. For phase 1 companies, you're eligible for our I-Core or C3I programs, which provide training on commercialization of your product in service of creating a great commercialization plan, which is necessary to achieve phase 2 funding. We also have supplements to promote diversity. So if you're not ready to apply for your own SBIR grant, but you're interested in the small business path, you can look for small businesses funded by NIH by using NIH Reporter, and they are able to apply for the supplement to fund a diverse position supporting their grant. Other resources at NIH include entrepreneurs in residence who can provide support for a single specific question. So things like regulatory strategy or FDA questions, maybe fundraising issues, etc. Being funded by NIH also allows you to apply to participate in showcase opportunities to attract investor support. And if you're selected for those opportunities, NIH also offers pitch coaching and assistance with your executive summary. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And also ask questions now. Thank you so much. Okay. So it doesn't look like we're getting any specific questions about that part of the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and open.
Oh, we do have one person with their hand raised.
Coming in. Okay.
Joyce, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thanks. This was a very helpful presentation. I'm excited to see all these resources that help small businesses through the NIH. I have a question. So it looks like a lot of the specific calls, what are they called? Requests for proposals through the SBIR are for like specific kinds of drugs and devices. If I am interested in developing sort of like a software company, is this like a good place to go, or is there like a different thing that I should apply to?
Okay, well, I suppose that depends a bit on like what the indication for your software would be. So there are omnibus funding opportunity announcements for small business, either in the SBIR or STTR, depending on which pathway you want to choose. And those are investigator initiated. So basically you could submit a proposal on anything you wanted that falls into an institute's mission space, and it doesn't have to be in response to one of those specific calls. We have like a general call for applications from small businesses, but I would still encourage you to have kind of a disease priority based on like what makes sense for what you're doing. And to reach out to a program officer ahead of time that you think, for whichever institute you think you might fall into. And again, it's not limited to NIH. So it also, there is CDC and FDA. So if you can also kind of explore their programs. And I encourage you to look at the SEED websites. They have lots of information kind of about what different institutes, et cetera, are interested in, and also contacts for each NIH institute.
Very helpful, thank you.
And hi, everybody. This is Natalie Trzynski. I'm a program officer and the NINDS Small Business Program. And so I'm going to be helping Taryn with all the questions. And so I do just want to go through some of the other questions that just came in the chat. And one of them was about the C3I program. So I don't know, Taryn, if you would like to take that.
Sure. Yeah, so the C3I program is basically an opportunity where you kind of go through a class where they teach you, you know, different skills and things necessary to kind of get to a commercial, to take your device, therapeutic, what have you, to a commercial place. And Natalie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if this is only for I-Corps, but I believe you also do like customer interviews to help kind of define what your commercial space is, or like confirm that your device or therapeutic will meet the need that the customer has, which is huge in making sure that, you know, you're actually meeting the need that you need to meet, and that you don't need to make additional adjustments, you know, to find a successful path to commercialization.
Yep, that's right. And C3I is specifically geared towards medical device development. And I put in the chat a little bit more information on that program. The I-Corps program is a little bit more general, not just devices, but you know, all other types of technologies. And then there was also another question about when is patenting required as you're going through this process.
So that's something that probably will almost always come up in review, because even in a phase 1, though, you don't specifically talk about your commercialization plan. Their reviewers are still allowed to comment on commercial potential. So you don't have to have patents, you know, to apply for a phase 1, but if you do have any security around your intellectual property, it's always good, you know, to explain what that is. So like if, you know, I don't know, if you're pursuing an agreement, like if in an STTR, if you develop something in your lab that the university patented for you, and now you're spinning out a company, you can say like, the patent exists for this, you know, special device or product, and we're in the process of negotiating an agreement with the university or something like that. Or you can just say, maybe that you filed the pre-version that isn't public. It's not a full patent application. It's just to like hold a placeholder, like you think you're going to apply for a patent. So any of that, basically wherever you are, and if, you know, you want to put that out there so people know and they understand how that fits into your potential commercialization, but it's not required, especially at a phase 1.
Great, thanks, Taryn. I think that's the questions that we have now. Obviously, we'll keep compiling questions as they come in, and we'll have lots of times for more questions at the end.
Indeed. Okay, so now we're going to hear from our panelists. They're going to give you a brief background about themselves and kind of how they got to where they are before we open it up for the greater Q&A. So first, we're going to hear from Rachel Dreilinger.
You got it. You got the name. Good. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for inviting me to participate. My name is Rachel Dreilinger. I'm a member of the Diné Nation, or the Navajo Nation. I'm also a biomedical engineer of 22, 23 years, something like that. And I'm an entrepreneur. So I'm co-founder and CEO of NeuraMedica, which is a neurosurgery device company. So I guess I have a few minutes to just talk a little bit about my background and how I got to where I am. When I started out working as an engineer, I never really imagined I would be a CEO. That wasn't really on my radar. But, you know, I worked at companies for a long time. My background and specialty is medical devices. You know, I did do robotics in my early career, drug discovery, stuff like that, drug discovery robotics, things like that. But then when I got into medical devices, I really, really loved that field. So I did consult for about 10 years doing medical device design and development. And then I started working with a client at the time. I started working with, he's my current business partner. He's a neurosurgeon. So he was up at our local medical school here. It's called Oregon Health and Science University, OHSU, and I'm in the Portland, Oregon area. This neurosurgeon had an idea. So I think I can speak a little bit to, how if you're a clinician or if you're in academia and you have an idea, how that can progress to something real. So Dr. Neil Roundy had this idea for a surgical clip that can close the dura mater. So the dura is the membrane that covers the brain and spinal cord. And then when the dura is opened, it's called a durotomy. And it can be kind of an emergency situation in surgery where the cerebrospinal fluid comes flowing out everywhere, and it has to get closed pretty quickly. And typically it's closed using suture. So it's a needle and thread puncturing a watertight membrane that needs to be watertight. And so you puncture it and it's leaking all over the place. It can take a long time. It can take 30 minutes, 45 minutes just to close the dura. So this is a simple clip that closes over the ends of the membrane, and then it dissolves in the body over time. So this was his idea. He had as I believe a 6th or 7th year resident at OHSU. And at OHSU, he applied for a grant that the university gives. It's called the Biomedical Innovation Program, through a group that wants to translate technology to the real world. And I believe that group at OHSU is an NIH funded group as well. So that's pretty cool because we sort of started there. So Dr. Roundy got this grant and I came on board. I was introduced to him and I developed all the early prototypes as a consultant. So I wasn't a part of OHSU. I am not from academia. I'm from sort of the business and corporate side. But I partnered with the clinician, and that's one way that clinicians can develop their technologies, is finding business people, finding engineers that want to come in and work with them and partner with them. So I came in, we developed prototypes, we submitted 2 patent applications in that first year, that was 2013. And then we were kind of sitting there going, well, what do we do now? We've got this IP we applied for, intellectual property, so the invention. So we're inventors on the technology. We've got, this idea. We've developed these prototypes. What's next? So the next step was we decided, with encouragement from mentors, business advisors, people around us who could help us sort of decide how to go forward, including OHSU. They have sort of a tech transfer department. So we had conversations with them. We decided to form a company. So I came on as CEO. My business partner, Dr. Neil Roundy, is the chief medical officer. And then from there, we went through the path of licensing the technology. So we made an invention, and then we had to license our own technology back to our company. And then the next step, the job of CEO is to raise money for the company. That's one big job. So then figure out how to get money, how to raise money. And I don't know how much more you want me to say, if that's my 5 minutes, but the pathway of getting money to further the technology, commercialize the device, I mean, that's just such a huge part of it, and it's so challenging and time consuming. So I will say we did get NSF phase 1 SBIR, and that was $225,000. And then we were fortunate enough to get an NIH NINDS phase 2 award, and that was for $1.5 million. So Taryn, I don't know if you want me to say more. Or
that was great for now. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Yes, and I'm just happy to be here and happy to answer any questions.
Yes, please go ahead and start asking your questions as you come up with them in the chat, and we'll get to them after everyone's introduced themselves all the way. Okay. Oliver, would you be kind enough to give your background next, please?
Hi, everyone. Also, thanks to NINDS for the invitation. Happy to be here. a little bit about my background. So I'm a chemist. So by training, I did a PhD in chemistry in Germany, and then came as a postdoc with a Humboldt Fellowship to UC Berkeley. And then I took one turn in my career, if you want, and I started got an opportunity. It was in the .com boom in a semiconductor company in Silicon Valley, and so that was a great opportunity. So that's when I worked there for 6.5 years, first as an engineer, then in business development later on. And at that point, I realized I wanted to do. I was a good sized company, but I felt I wanted to have more of an impact. So I thought at that point to do something differently, more on a startup scale. And my wife was a faculty at Princeton, so at some point I moved there, and then I got into this. Worked on this project, project at the time was actually also funded by an R21 from NIH to develop stretchable microelectrodes. So it's coming then from a business background in semiconductor, where everything is very controlled and has to be very exact and repeatable. What I liked in this stretchable electrode technology is that it was very straightforward to get the stretchable to get the electrodes to be stretchable, because there's very different approaches to this they tend to be on the complicated side. This I like the simplicity, and we had a plan to commercialize this already back then. So that was 2006, 7, 8. But then it turns out that there was much more work to be done on the engineering side. So basically, I spent about 4 or 5 years on the engineering side to make it work conceptually. And our first application was a collaboration with Columbia University to using these stretchable electrodes in a tool to reproduce the biomechanics of a traumatic brain injury by rapidly deforming hippocampal tissue slice that's grown on the array. And then the new part, there was an existing model from the neurotrauma lab at Columbia. And what our contribution was to actually integrate electrodes in that stretchable substrate, so we can assess the electrophysiology or the health and function of the cells before and after the injury. So that was our goal, and so we achieved this goal. Wrote a few papers about this, and then I decided afterwards to commercialize the technology. It was to start a company to commercialize the technology with the traumatic brain injury being the first. It's a niche, but it's the first niche application. But then I saw other potential applications for other biomechanics, electrophysiology combinations down the road. So the first SBIR we got was to make the stretchable arrays in a commercial manner. So in terms of quality, quantity, repeatability. So we had to change quite a bit from the prototypes we had at Princeton. It was way too expensive. Yield was way too low. So we did this in a phase 1, and then in a phase 2, we developed the equipment to use to use these stretchable arrays in an effective manner. So, and now we have a roadmap to build on this. So now we have about $250,000 in revenue so far, and hope to continue growing this this year. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Okay, Francisco, do you mind following Oliver?
Yeah, sure. So hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. A little bit background on myself. I grew up in Mexico. I came up here to start my college education back in 2013. I actually didn't know what I wanted to do back then. I just knew that, so hopefully I don't diverge too much from the topic of the seminar, but in Mexico, medical education is a little different. So straight from high school, you can go into med school. And that was the idea that I had back then. But up here, you go to college and then you go to med school. And when I came up here, one of my advisors was, well, if you still want to go to med school, you need to decide for a degree beforehand. And back then, I didn't think that I was really good as an engineer, just because I wasn't that good at math. Still not that good, but I took a couple of engineering classes and decided to go biomedical engineering. And one of my professors, Lucia Kiesel, she kind of kept pushing me more into the engineering aspect of things, and I ended up enjoying myself just developing technology, messing around with electronics, mechanics models, and so on. So by the time that I transferred to ASU, I didn't want to go to med school anymore, just because it was a huge time commitment, and I wanted to get out as soon as possible. So I just decided to dedicate myself entirely for biomedical engineering. And after that, I worked with a couple of professors at ASU. Still didn't have that much of a focus. I know I want to do something with prosthetics, the integration of brain-computer interface. At that point, I graduated in 2018 with my bachelor's, and then I did my master's in a 4+1 program. Basically, just took me a year to do my master's, and I ended up doing it on soft robotics and another emerging technology that I didn't really know at the time, but I mean, it was something that interested me a lot. And if you can summarize my experience in one sentence, would be, I usually don't know how the technology, but it is interesting, so I go for it. And so far, it has set me here. After graduating with my master's in 2019, I interviewed with Oliver at BMSEED, and it was the first time I heard about stretchable microelectrode arrays. So, but I could see the potential that they have and how they could solve some of the issues we currently have with control systems on prosthetics and also brain-computer interfaces. And basically, I just enjoy the work that I'm doing with Oliver right now. Right now, I'm kind of far away from my original goal that was BCI, but I ended up enjoying the technology of SMEAs, seeing how we can make more tools to make the research and development of new drugs even for academia and so on. So, and also working with BMC basically has allowed me to expand my knowledge of multiple general topics that I didn't get exposed during my academic years. Working with a startup is, so I have no frame of reference for working with a bigger corporation, but working with a startup has been quite exciting. I get to see new technologies being made. My opinions are actually taken into account when seeing what direction the company is going to be made into. And also I participate with Oliver in multiple NIH programs. Right now that we're working on an ICOR program for a different model of the technology. So it's quite exciting to see how we are going to fit the SMEAs into this new field. Basically, we're seeing how we fit the SMEAs into organoids. And I do believe that that's most of the time that I have, so I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francisco. Okay, Anna, you would be so kind Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Moreno. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Navega Therapeutics. I moved to the US from Mexico in high school, did my undergrad at the University of Arizona, and then moved to San Diego to do my PhD at UCSD in bioengineering. And there I was focused on developing a platform using a variant of CRISPR called deadCas9. So CRISPR originally is from bacteria used to edit the genome. But we use a variant of it to, instead of editing the genome permanently, we can turn genes up or down. So we do epigenetic regulation. I was always really interested in translation. So not so much stopping the research, publishing and going on to the next project, but really continuing to do that work and help patients, bring it to the clinic. So first I applied this platform for an eye disease, retinitis pigmentosa. But then I focused on a mutation in the sodium channel called NaV1.7. So there's patients that have a loss of function mutation that feel no pain when they have a permanent mutation in this gene. But what's also really interesting is that there's patients that have a rare disease that have a gain of function mutation in this gene that feel more pain than normal. And so I was really excited when I started seeing some results in vivo in mouse models in my PhD. And so we started applying for, we filed IP through the university. And then I was thinking about how do I actually translate this and move this forward? So I started taking business classes at the university and then also started to think about raising funds from friends and family so we can actually get incorporated. And then soon after, I started applying for grants through the SBIR system. And thanks to that, I was able to license the IP out of the university, move it into lab space, J Labs. So J Labs is an incubator space out of Janssen, the pharmaceutical company. So we have our own lab space. And so really excited about having that opportunity through the NIH grants. Since then, we've raised more non-dilutive funding, but also now are raising a Series A. As Rachel was mentioning earlier, one of my #1 jobs as CEO is raising capital and really enabling technology to move forward. So happy to answer any questions you might have. If you're, if you're in school, how you can translate this and move this forward. And thank you so much for inviting me here today.
Thank you so much, Anna. Okay, last but certainly not least, Jen, you'd give us your background.
Sure, happy to. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Nwankwo. I am the founder and CEO of 1910 Genetics. 1910 Genetics is a biotech company that's integrated artificial intelligence, computation, and biological automation to accelerate the design of both small molecule and protein therapeutics. In terms of background, I went to a small historically Black college in South Carolina, Claflin University. I studied biochemistry. I'd always known from a pretty young age that I wanted to do something that had to do with drug discovery, although I didn't know it was called drug discovery at the time. So I spent most of my summers in undergrad, initially doing basic research. So I think the summer after my freshman year, I was at George Washington University, and an HHMI funded a fellowship program. And then the next summer I was at Yale doing really basic but exciting fundamental biological research. And I think after my junior year of college, I decided that I wanted to start to experience sort of like the more translational side of things. And so I had my first exposure to the pharmaceutical industry at Eli Lilly out of the Indianapolis headquarters. And I was fortunate to work in the antibody engineering group that would then go out to develop a drug that's now on the market called Trulicity. And that was really my first exposure to industry as a college junior. I would then proceed on to Novartis here in Massachusetts, working in the cancer target discovery, target validation group, and later on coming back to join their pharmacology and formulations group. I stayed on in the Boston area to do my PhD work at Tufts University School of Medicine, and most of my doctoral work was also done at Boston Children's Hospital. I decided to study pharmacology because I really just wanted to fundamentally understand how to discover drugs. It didn't really matter to me what the disease area was or what the therapeutic modality was. I just fundamentally wanted to understand, how do you get some sort of foreign agent into a human body to have some therapeutic effect without killing people? that's just fundamentally what pharmacology is, right? And so along the way, you know, even as a grad student at Tufts, you know, I remember just being very diverse in terms of the labs that I selected to do my rotations, and just wanted to say, okay, I want to learn how cancer drug discovery works. And then now I got that, okay, let me go on and learn how hematology drug discovery works. Now I got that, let me go to neuroscience. And so I very much viewed myself as a platform, as a human walking platform, in terms of I wanted to just learn every possible application and so on. And during my doctorate research, I was able to also identify a target, a protease, and sort of be the first one to, you know, create like an animal model of that particular target and show its role in a variety of pain phenotypes in hematological conditions. And, you know, took a pharmacological approach to validate the target, a genetic approach to validate the target, and felt like I really cut my teeth in terms of like, you know, how to, you know, do both target ID and then to try to progress that initial target identification into drug discovery. And then I had the good fortune to join a startup company and sort of leading their efforts to bring in new drug programs, primarily from pharmaceutical companies, and to put them through our technology-enabled clinical trials process. And all along the way, you know, I just had always been fascinated by technology. And sort of when I think of myself as a classical pharmacologist who had learned, you know, just sort of like the very old school way of doing drug discovery and working and pairing with other disciplines from medicinal chemistry to structural biology, et cetera, on these drug discovery teams, I was often, you know, the pharmacologists who had to, you know, test all of these drug candidates, you know, in all these animal models or in vitro models. And I remember just feeling like a lot of my work, frankly, could be automated, or a lot of my work could be roboticized in some form, shape, or manner. And around that time, you know, there was a lot of interest in applying, you know, artificial intelligence and in computation and so on to just the more remote and like rote aspects and repetitive aspects of what we do if you think about a traditional SAR campaign. And so that really ignited my interest to found 1910 Genetics, sort of a platform company. You know, like I said, I consider myself a human platform, never really married to any one disease area. And that's exactly what my company is, not married to any one disease area, but really excited about bringing technology to, you know, remove some of the bottlenecks or some of the pain points that, you know, we as drug hunters or we as pharmacologists are sort of often experiencing in that process. So the company is 4 years old. We recently launched out of stealth last year, announcing a $26 million Series A financing. And we're based in the Boston Seaport District. And we're fortunate to get our first NIH grant, which was the first time, frankly, applying last year as well, about $500,000 in a phase 1 STTR grant to sort of, you know, take one of our public assets forward into in vitro proof of concept and development candidate nomination. So I'm happy to talk to you about everything. You know, most of my fundraising has been venture capital money, less on the grant side, but we do have one NINDS grant. And so I'm happy to answer questions around that balance between non-dilutive and dilutive funding and when to raise, how to raise, and all of that. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. That was great to hear everybody's backgrounds. All right, I think it'll probably take a minute or two for questions to start populating in the chat, but we have a few that we kind of had people ask ahead of time. So the first one is, how is applying for a small business grant different from maybe an academic-based grant mechanism like an R01, if any of you have experience with both?
Yeah, I have done both, and I would say the major difference in general, I would say not R1, also R21 versus the phase 1, is that at the university you can focus on the main document. The main documents are mostly very similar in terms of formatting and etc., like the research strategy, the abstract, and so on. At the university, you send them to an administrator, and then they put everything together. At the additional work in a small business is you have to be familiar with this the portal of NIH, the assist platform on ERA Commons. So that's some additional work. It's particularly the first time. Took me quite a while to get this, but once you've done it a couple of times, it's a very similar. And then the major difference is that you need a commercialization plan for the phase 2 SBIR versus you don't need it for the R1. I would say those are the big differences.
Excellent. Yes, I can attest. It's definitely a very different beast to apply on your own without the university support.
It is.
But there are many resources and video tutorials about.
Well, and I have to say, I
want
to add one thing, and particularly my first one, but even after that, there's always something that happens, and the NIH, like the help desk, is actually really good. I was terrified at first. I thought I was on hold and you're not going to get any, but it's actually it's very good. So the help desk is very helpful.
That's always good. It's always good when a help desk is helpful. Excellent. Okay. All right. Can we have someone or multiple people chime in about licensing technology through a university tech transfer office, and what are the advantages and what are the impediments? It sounds like Anna and Jen and also Rachel have all done that, and you as well, Oliver, if you all want to take a turn.
I guess I can get us started. So I license, like I think Rachel was mentioning the same thing, when you're the inventor of your own patents, but then you still have to license them through the university. So one thought here is that making sure that the co-inventor or the PI that's on the patents actually is okay with you licensing it out. I mean, the university usually asks those PIs if they're aware and okay with you licensing that. So thankfully, there's a lot of alignment with my PI there. And we started a relationship with the tech transfer. Actually took us around a year to license the patents, and mainly because we were really adamant that we didn't want to give the university any equity into the company. So we were sticking to our guns and saying, okay, we need the equity for employees. We need the equity. We're going to all get highly diluted over time. So it's just about that negotiation, and also trying not to use too much of the lawyers' times, because for us, each hour that you spend with the lawyers is $1,000 or $2,000, depending on how many of them are on the call. And so it's having that patience and ensuring that you can explain how are you going to use the patents, and how are you going to actually use them to commercialize the product. We're also currently licensing IP from NYU and University of Toronto. And I can say that these different universities are different beasts. Some of them are more aggressive and want more than others. So again, it's at least in my experience, it's about having patience and nicely negotiating the deal out.
I'm happy to speak next if I can jump in too. So yeah, I had a very similar experience to Anna, where we spent a lot of time negotiating that license agreement. We took about, and when I say we, it was me. So I was negotiating with the big university for 9 months, doing something I had never done before and had no idea what I was doing. And as Anna points out, the attorneys are so expensive. And one thing I talk to people about, if you're an inventor, have ideas or want to commercialize, there's so much you can do on your own where you don't have to hire people or pay people to do it. So yeah, definitely we've taken that route of bootstrapping and doing everything as inexpensively as possible. So because I'm an engineer, what I did to negotiate the license agreement, let me go back to, I think Taryn was saying, oh, what are the pros and cons? I would never have chosen to license a technology. I licensed the technology because we invented it through the university. So my partner was a resident at the university, and he got university grants to develop the technology. That's the only reason we licensed the technology. I wouldn't sit around trying to choose to do that. It would be easier for me to partner with someone who wasn't a part of a big organization and then just found a company. To me, that would be a little bit easier. But nonetheless, that's the path we took, and it's fine. So what I did, because I'm an engineer and I hadn't negotiated a license agreement before, is I just talked to as many people as possible. I had all these business advisors kind of around me, part of OHSU, maybe not part of the university, but kind of business mentors and people that are helping out. And so I just talked to everyone that I could find. And I got advice from them about the license agreement. I made a spreadsheet of all the different terms in the license agreement, which is this huge document. And then I wrote down the advice of like every single person. I probably had 10 people that I talked to from all various different backgrounds. And that's how I went through and sort of learned the process, figured out what was important to me. And as Anna pointed out, I didn't want them to have equity. That was important to me. There's certain things that I thought were important, and maybe I didn't, know about negotiating license agreements, but I also was able to sort of look at what my judgment was about it, and then talk to other people and gather their feedback. In the end, I got to decide what I wanted the terms to be. So, it was a really amazing process. But yeah, it's definitely challenging. And again, very time consuming. And then once you get to the license agreement, then comes the hard part of raising money for your company and trying to push that technology forward.
Does anybody else have anything they want to share, thoughts on that before we move to the next question?
Maybe I just,
Yes.
we had our license from Princeton. It was a very pleasant, I would say, experience. There was not a whole lot of negotiations. I mean, part of it is, I was also working with the main inventor of the technology at Princeton. So I knew the people there, and basically they sent us the draft. And at that point, they really wanted only their main goal was to get the patenting. The money they spent on patenting, they want to get it back. So we negotiated a little bit about spreading the payments out over a few years. But so there was a very not as acrimonious, not as contentious negotiations on our end. Yeah, so it can be the other way. It doesn't have to be contentious.
I would say it seems like IP related, the main barrier is always cost. Like whether you're licensing it from someone else or from the company perspective, trying to license it, file the IP on your own, cost is a huge. Okay, great. So we're going to go on to the next question. This was sort of directed at you, Jen, if you want to take first pass, but others are welcome to weigh in. How did you decide to go to venture capital early on rather than grant funding?
Thanks for the question. I don't know that it's an either or. I don't know that I thought about it as an either or. I certainly pursued both, and I would encourage entrepreneurs to pursue both. I think there are a couple of things you have to think about. First is, for me, when I started the company in 2018, I didn't think that my chances of getting an NIH grant were terribly high as a first-time grantee. And if I were to go solo without any sort of like collaborator. So I thought, everyone talks about how difficult it is to raise venture capital funding, and perhaps NIH grants are easier, but I didn't think they seemed equally challenging to me. Let's just put it that way. And I just thought, I don't think I'm any more likely to get an NIH grant as a principal investigator for the first time, less than 30 years old, than I am likely to get funding from a venture capitalist. But then again, less than 0.2% of venture capital funding goes to Black women. So however way I cut it and sliced it, it was hard, in any demographic you wanted to put me in. And so I just pursued both. And that's my recommendation to you, is to pursue both. And the only thing I would say is at some point you have to think about venture capital funding does get slightly easier the more you raise. The more you raise, it does get easier. It's kind of like the rich getting richer kind of thing. Not unlike the NIH, by the way, where the same 5 investigators get like maybe 30% of all funding, something like that. It's not it's not unlike that, in terms of certain people just tend to get well funded. So you just have to evaluate for yourself, what you think your likelihood of success is. Today, to be honest, I would focus more on venture capital funding because it's gotten a little easier for me on that path. But you just have to assess your sort of relative probability of success at each stage. That's how I think about it. But when you start out and you don't know and you haven't gotten either one, you should pursue both. And that's what I did.
I'll second that. I'll just add on that the fundraising part is so difficult. I took a similar strategy of just everything, just trying everything. You have this down the road, that you're going to run out of the current funding you have, or that you need more funding, or you're right at the beginning and you don't have any funding. And I just targeted everything. I mean, DOD, local Oregon investors, grants, angels, VC, institutional investors, SBIR, like everything. And you win some, you lose some. So yeah, just wanted to second that point.
I would also like to make a point that we started with non-dilutive funding. And I think it's also great because sometimes when you are raising money, you're still developing your idea, you're still trying to figure out what are the milestones, how are you developing your drug? So it's good to understand why you need the money and how much you need and what you're going to use it for. But I agree, always be fundraising all in every single way possible. But the last point too, and something that I've learned over time, is that our lead candidate is in pain. And there's not a lot of support in the venture capital community with pain. They're afraid of the placebo effect, and it's our baby, right? It's something that we're really passionate about. We do have a platform technology where we can go after more indications. So how we're actually ensuring that we can push this program forward is explaining to investors that we do have non-dilutive funding going into this program, that is going to fund some important milestones that potentially partner it. So I think it's important too, is that there is that really great support from the NIH to go after these more rare diseases, more complex indications that a lot of venture partners are just not, they find it too risky. So thanks to that we were able to push that program forward. And I think it's super important because there's a lot of patients that need it.
Excellent, thank you. That was amazing and accurate information for sure. Okay, so the next question is, can someone register a company, work at an incubator or a contract research organization, and then get a patent to avoid licensing it from a university? I'm just going to say, I think if you were at a contract research organization and they filed for the patent, then you'd still have to license it from them. I don't know if anyone has any experience being at an incubator or knows kind of more how that process would work.
I think it depends on, perhaps I'll ask the person who's asking this question, how are you, it depends on what you're thinking about a CRO for. In general, CROs don't take your patents. If they generate any intellectual property in the course of doing work for you, your material services agreement should already have stated that they would license that to you exclusively for no fee and all of that. So, but your core technology is unlikely to be developed at a CRO. Perhaps the testing of it and generating additional data packages, but if your core technology is a therapeutic of some kind, you already would be the one to have the insight. Yes, you can work with a CRO to design the molecules for you, but then they'll have to license you would have an MSA before you begin the work that says any IP that's generated is yours. So it depends on what you're using the CRO for. Are you using them to design molecules, design peptides, or are you using them to test peptides that you already have? That's sort of like how I think about it.
I mean, I can add something to agreed on the CRO. That's usually a work for hire situation. Whoever owns the IP, that's going to be dependent on where the technology was developed and what your contracts are with those organizations. So if you're at some sort of university, you'll have a work contract or a work agreement that you have to look at to see who owns what. or if you're negotiating a contract and you want to develop some technology outside of the university, you kind of have to negotiate that up front. So it really comes down to sort of the legal contracts, I would say.
So very important to pay attention to those. It sounds like, so you know what you're getting yourself into. Okay, our next question is, how did people do entrepreneurship while in academia? It sounds like some of you at least started your idea while you were in academia, and did you consider pursuing remaining in academia, or how did you decide to spin out into a small business?
Sure, I guess I can start with that. So like I mentioned, for me, it's kind of like a little seed in the back of my head. At least personally, my dad was always telling me, you're in bioengineering, you should think about starting a company, because it's very common, at least in my family. It's a lot of entrepreneurship. But again, you always kind of, yeah, whatever, dad, kind of shove it off. But once I started actually generating data and getting really excited about what I was doing, then I started really getting into that space. And I looked across the UC San Diego system and okay, what kind of business classes can help me kind of learn a little bit more of what I'm doing, what kind of opportunities are out there. And there was actually a lot of support there. We actually, there are some pitch competitions, for example. We were able to get like $50,000 on this that helped us pay for some, like the lawyer fees, obviously, it's the most important aspect in the beginning. The business classes really helped me with my pitch, my actual deck. As scientists, we think everyone's gonna want to, there's gonna love our idea and want our idea, but then you really have to understand market need, product fit, who's gonna, how are you gonna commercialize this? What kind of key opinion leaders should you be speaking with? The budgeting, the marketing, all that aspect is something I had no clue about. So if you're thinking about potentially, like you're not sure, I would definitely say everyone should take business classes. It doesn't matter if you're humanities or science. I think it's super helpful and something we all really need. And then that kind of slowly progressed. We actually incorporated what I was still doing my PhD. I started applying for grants early on and getting a lot of advice early on. So it's just about taking that step and doing it while you're in, you can do it while you're in academia. Just like Rachel was mentioning, just getting support around you.
I can speak from a non-academia person. I did mention it sort of at the beginning. I come from a corporate background. I don't even have a PhD. I don't have an MBA. I am a biomedical engineer working in industry. And one thing I found is I work with a lot of doctors, surgeons, dentists, clinicians, people like that. And often I've found it's good for people like that who, if you're a full-time surgeon, it's pretty hard to start your own company. So if you can identify and find someone who's kind of more like me, maybe is an engineer or is more on the business side, I think that's one way to do it. I love that Anna is CEO of her own company, and that's amazing. Some organizations don't let you do that. OHSU, they have some rules. If you develop a technology, you can be inventor, but you can't necessarily run your own company. So again, it's dependent on that organization. And finding and identifying, people to support you, run your company, mentors, things like that can be a good approach as well.
Thank you both so much. I actually want to kind of dovetail off of that before we move to the next question and ask how you kind of built up those networks or, found people to be mentors in the business space, kind of like figure out how to move forward.
So there was different opportunities. One was through the Rady School of Business. So the university has their own business school, and they had an accelerator program called My Startup XX as it was all female founders, which obviously is like Jen was mentioning, 0.02, I think she was mentioning, of Black female CEOs get funded. In general, for female, there's not a lot of female CEOs, not a lot of support or I think there's learning about how we need to present a little bit differently and focus, we're not male CEOs, and we have to kind of understand that and use our strengths for that. So that was one aspect, getting those other female CEOs that were supportive, as well as something else called the Drive Mentorship Program, where they brought just entrepreneurs and people in San Diego that wanted to mentor you. So the university really provided that support. And lastly, the city of San Diego also has support for small business, and it's free. So again, look in your city, see if there's opportunities where you live. And yeah, that's for at least for us, that's how we started getting some advice and advisors around us.
I'd say for us, to as I think about the very beginning, two key resources were very crucial for me. Again, being an African-American founder, I'm also a solo founder, so I actually don't have co-founders. So that even makes it extra challenging to sort of go on this journey alone, initially starting out. The first check we got into the company was about, I think, 2 or 3 months after I started it. And it was from a VC who had known me as an employee at one of the portfolio companies of that VC. So I had worked at that startup, and when I said I wanted to go start my own thing, he was like, I really don't know what you're going to go start, but like, I think it was like a $250K check. I didn't even have a deck at the time. So I think in a lot of ways, I feel fortunate to have that just 250 to just, it was just like me and a literal 250K check. That was it. There was no co-founder. There was really nothing. And so just starting out and just starting from there, I'll say the next thing was actually the next 150K check. And that came from Y Combinator. I would recommend Y Combinator very highly. It's an accelerator program based in Silicon Valley. And it's not for the 150K. It's because we would go on to raise a 4 million seed round later that year. We couldn't have raised that 4 million seed round without Y Combinator. Y Combinator just exposed us to like a very wide investor network. And I think in some ways, it didn't completely equalize the delta between me as an African-American woman and my white Caucasian male counterparts. It didn't level the playing field, but it came as close as it could to make it such that, hey, you would get it in front of these people. It's just now a matter of like, can you be convincing? And yes, some people still wouldn't fund you regardless. So if you're starting out really early, I would recommend Y Combinator. I think that they really do help you make a very material impact in closing that first seed round. After the seed round, it really is down to the traction you've been able to show. You know, I think of the seed round as saying, I believe in you and your vision as a founder, but you don't really have a lot to show for it. So take this seed money and go build and show some traction. And the Series A is like, okay, you said you were going to do this as seed and you actually did it. And here's some proof. And you've done even more than that. That's what the Series A does. And that's how those 2 rounds are different. But I think, honestly, there isn't a lot to go off of as seed. And you as a founder are the most important diligence item. The entire bet is on you as a person. So you really just need people who have that deep conviction. And some of these accelerator programs, some accelerator programs I would say are very predatory. There's some that I would not recommend. So I would really only put Y Combinator out there, just personally, yeah.
I can add if Oliver and Francisco don't have comments.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I think the question was, how do you find the mentors and advisors? So again, like Anna, it was pretty much through the university, because the original funding, the original grant, which was, it was like a $67,000 grant through the biomedical innovation program. They were really supportive, to be honest. It's challenging working with these big organizations. But the thing I tried to focus on was, hey, we have a common goal. The common goal is we have this great technology that needs to see the light of day. And how can we get it there? And so when I was having challenges and struggles with the license agreement or any other issues, if I didn't like something they were doing, I would try to focus on that partnership and just the idea that we have a really great technology and let's get it out there. And that was a segue, or that was a diversion from the point that they did have a lot of resources. They had a lot of advice that they could provide, recommendations on attorneys and things like that. And as part of the BIP, or the Biomedical Innovation Program, they did provide mentors and people that you could that could take you under their wing, as well as networking events. That's another thing I don't know if anyone mentioned. I don't really like business and networking and buzzwords and stuff like that. That stuff kind of annoys me. So when I talk about networking, what I think about is just meeting people, meeting people. And when you meet people, then they can maybe advise you to go talk to this other person, or, it's just like, it's a good way to find the help that you need because you have the network of people. And maybe that's why they call it networking. But again, like all that business jargon and stuff, it's like, I try to just be a little bit more like real about it. And I think the business world can be intimidating, and it can be just annoying and have annoying jargon. So, like if you're just starting out, it can be intimidating, and it doesn't have to be intimidating. You're not like networking, you're meeting other people to help you make connections. So I kind of try to think of it that way.
Thank you all. It was very helpful. Francisco, I'm going to ask you to take the first pass at this next question. What challenges have you faced being underrepresented minorities in the very homogenous space of startups, and how have you kind of dealt with that?
So yeah, about that, I mean, maybe I haven't gotten myself that out yet, but I basically just go for it. I mean, kind of going back to the previous question, how do you meet people? How do you network? I usually don't think myself as a minority. I mean, I'm a man, so a bit of advantage in there. But just go for it. I would say 7 out of 10 times people are going to at least give you the time of the day to hear you out or see what you have to say. The other thing I would say, try to be as respectful as possible when reaching out to people. If they have a title, use it. I honestly kind of hate sales. So whenever I reach out to people, I try not to sound like I'm trying to sell something. And also, if I'm reaching out to somebody, it's because I want to learn something or I want to get their opinion on what I'm working on. So it's like, hey, I see that you have this expertise. I doing this project on the field, and I feel like your input would be important. Like there's something that I'm missing that is probably something very simple that you know out of the top of your head, but I don't. So yeah, I would say my main approach is basically just ask as many questions as possible and see what they have to say. At the end of the day, maybe it's not necessarily what I was looking for, but you are always going to learn something, and I think that's the most important thing about it.
Anybody else have thoughts to add to that one? Thank you, Francisco.
I would just want to say that we until a few months ago, we were in an incubator here, the Center for Entrepreneurial Innovation here in Phoenix, and was a very diverse incubator, different, really, I mean, all kinds of different backgrounds and founders and female in different racial categories, really. And in our lab, we have a Panamanian, Chinese American mix, and I mean, it's all mix. So it's I don't think it's a big has been a big problem. And Phoenix is quite a melting pot as well.
I think sometimes challenges you face, it's hard to know whether it's because you're female, or at least for me, is it because I'm Latin? Is it because I'm young? Is it because I'm a first-time CEO? It kind of stacks up. Like, which one of these are the reasons that it's challenging? So I think that the best thing, that what's helped me the most is getting, at least building my confidence, is having people around me that believe in me. Like Francisco was saying, just going for it and not kind of letting that drive you. Like, okay, is it, these ideas, it's just going for that and just having conviction. Like I think some of the challenges I face, I'm raising my Series A now. Some of the challenges I face is that some of the investors want to take the role away from me, like move me away from CEO into COO role, or we'll make the other people on your team a BP of something. We'll put in all these experienced people, right? Because we are raising 50 million, it's a big sum. So the thought there really is if the investors don't believe in you, then you move to the next investor. And thankfully we've signed a term sheet with someone that does want to keep us as they do believe in us. They do understand that we're the scientists, that we're the most passionate. We're the ones that are going to be working on this. Doesn't matter what challenges face us, we're not going to run away from it. And so it's just also surrounding yourself with like-minded people. There are some groups, at least in San Diego, of female founders, females, in these leadership roles. And I think that's really important, at least to I think Jen was nodding when I was mentioning the early aspects as, people are going through it with you. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I thought it was funny because it feels like a melting pot sometimes when you're trying to figure out what aspect of your intersectionality as an underrepresented person is at play here. And it starts to feel like a long algebraic equation that you got to solve for X, and which is X, and hold one constant, hold the woman part constant and vary the fact that you're Black, or hold the fact that you're Black and vary the fact that you're young, and just pick whichever variable you want. But it really is hard to be a first-time CEO and be a woman and be well, in my case, African-American, and it's a lot to be it all at once. What I would say is that with investors, they're not all worried about the same things. So for example, I can tell you that technology-focused investors actually like the fact that you're young, because most of the people they've made money from, like the Zuckerbergs, were young when they made money. The reverse is the case for the biotech VCs. They have not made money from young people, so they want the traditional 55-year-old former CEO of Pfizer. That's the kind of exec they want to fund. So, find the angle is sort of what I would say. No matter how bleak the outlook looks, there's always an angle. And my encouragement to entrepreneurs is just find the angle. There's got to be something about you that resonates with the VC. Yes, it might not be everything, but yeah, and I think it's important to understand at Y Combinator. One thing they taught us is understand the stereotype for your group and be the opposite of that. So if the stereotype for young first-time entrepreneurs is that we don't typically have a clear path to commercialization, or we haven't done this before, or whatever, like how can you demonstrate that you're going to be the one to buck that trend, and so on and so forth. So just know what the stereotype is for your group, and do whatever you can to try to address that in advance of meeting with investors. And then as you go to investors, find the angle. All investors are not the same. Find the angle, find a little crack to just seep through, and you'll eventually make it. You keep at it long enough, the funding round will come through.
I can speak about, being a woman in engineering and business has definitely been challenging. And then being a Native woman in that, it's really hard to find people like me. So growing up, I never really saw other people like me. Of course, I'm a white passing Native. So I have that white privilege going for me. I grew up off the reservation. So I didn't, grow up on the res. So I'm a city Native person. And just, the only time I got to see my own family is when we would go to the res ourselves. I didn't really experience a lot of other Native people. So, you're kind of figuring out who you are and feeling different and not really understanding why, and feeling excluded and left out and not really understanding that feeling. And then as you grow through your career and experience things that people say and do that are inappropriate, and also, so you experience that, and then you also sort of start to get into your own power, recognizing how your individuality is actually incredible. It's an incredible resource that you can use to being different is just a wonderful thing. It's innovative in and of itself, and you're able to innovate based on your unique approach and your unique background. So it takes, for me, it took a long time to kind of come into that power, recognize it, and then also just meet other Native people, Native engineers. And I've made a really big effort to meet other Native engineers too. For a long time, I just worked at companies, but in the last 10 years or so, I've really made a big effort to meet other Native business people. I'm in it's like this new social network now called the Capital Boutique, which is founded by a Native woman out of MIT. And she's trying to connect entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, with VCs and women VCs. And as Anna and Jen have pointed out, under 2% of all VC money goes to women. It's a really low amount. So, it's wonderful for us to be here, taking up space and doing what we're doing unapologetically. Like, I'm not going to sit and apologize for being who I am. I'm just going to be who I am. And I think Anna said, you just sort of like, the beauty is you kind of choose who you work with. If someone is being a jerk about it, you don't have to work with that person. And I love that about consulting. I got to choose who I worked with. I choose my mentors. If I'm hearing inappropriate stuff, I'm going to choose to go work with other people. And that's kind of one way to sort of maintain yourself. It is disheartening in business communication to hear a lot of Native things that people just sort of throw out and don't think about it. I was on a call this week, and someone just casually is saying, oh yeah, we went off the reservation or something like that. You hear a lot of stuff like that. People don't even think twice about it, but it is frustrating. So, yep.
Thank you all for sharing those experiences. All right, I think we're gonna end on this last question I have for you all. How did you know that your scientific idea or ideas could make something usable or profitable? So kind of what, how did you figure out that you had something that was worth pursuing? If I guess we'll just kind of go down the list. Rachel, you're first on my list, if you don't mind going first.
Okay, yeah, sure. So the way I knew that is called market research. So one thing I learned in this whole process is that you can have an idea as an engineer or as an inventor or as a scientist or as a doctor or as a dentist or whatever. You can have an idea and you might think it's a really great idea. And then you might put a bunch of money of maybe your own money into developing it and then getting other people to give you money. But then when you go to put it on the market, you find that the customers don't even want it. And they don't even like it and they don't even care about it, or they want it completely different. So I did learn actually from the NSF program. They did this great program that's kind of like an I-Corps, but smaller scale, where they force you to interview your customers. And we had to interview 30 customers. The first thing we had to do was identify who are the customers. So they really made you, you come from an engineering or a science background, and they really force you to start to think like a business person commercializing a product and where it's going to go and who's going to actually buy it, who's your customer. So, we had a handful, there's probably 5 different customers, from maybe the patient is an indirect customer, but there's, the surgeon is a customer, the value analysis committee at the hospital who decides to purchase stuff, the purchasing department, insurance companies, identify your customer. And then you go and actually talk to your customer and ask them what they want before you put all that money into development. So that's a huge thing that I learned, and that was through, NSF, and I find it really, really valuable. Again, it speaks to the point of, if you're an inventor, you don't have to spend $1 kajillion. You can do your own market research. You can interview customers. You can do, you can look up market stuff is something that's super important. What's your market for your device, for your product? And you can do a lot of that yourself. You can do a lot of the IP stuff, looking at prior art. There's just so much you can do on your own. So I'll cut it short there.
Thanks, Jen. Oliver, do you have anything to add? Oh, you're muted, Oliver.
sorry. So we had this early collaboration where we, in the proof of concept phase, really with this R21 NIH grant and some grants from the state of New Jersey. And so that was with the lab, with the neurotrauma repair lab at Columbia. So there was okay, they have this model, and then we were adding these traumatic brain injury model, and we were adding these stretchable electrodes in it. And so I thought very early on this could be something that evolves to a business. It was my goal from the get-go. And because there's people do electrophysiology and people do biomechanics in terms of using cell stretchers. So what our technology does, it combines the two. It has some additional benefits as well. So I saw quite early on that this could be, if you can do both with one tool, using that would be of greater benefit. And we are currently, but right now we are expanding on this. So we've built this tool, we sold the first few, and now we are expanding to use this technology for other, also in vitro preclinical research type of applications. We're going to actually next week we'll be participant in the upcoming ICOR program. So we are excited about the customer interviews, as Rachel mentioned. We have to do 100 in this. So yeah, we'll find out more and more as we go.
Awesome, thank you. Anna?
Yeah, we also participated in the NSF ICOR program while I was doing my PhD. So we had to speak with physicians and in patients that were in chronic pain. But I think honestly, another aspect that is kind of doing a competitive landscape of who's targeting what you're targeting, like what kind of drugs are they using? Are they, for example, for us, are they small molecules? Are they antibodies? And how is your approach better? Is it going to be the best in class? Why have those failed? So kind of doing a competitive landscape, I think, is really important. And also the last point too is the more you speak with people, the more you kind of have advice from people, then you start really honing in. So we had a call with someone from Novartis, and they mentioned you're going after chronic pain, which is a really large market. And that's where we came up with this rare disease and pain, and that's how we pivoted. So also being flexible and open to advice, I think it's another aspect that will help you really hone in on who you're actually going to be helping with the technology.
Excellent, thank you. Jen, do you have anything to add?
I think I definitely echo, I didn't do any of the programs that have been mentioned necessarily, iCorp's on, but I think no matter the program that you go through, what you're looking for is something called product market fit. And at Y Combinator, the motto is make something users want, make something people want. So no matter what you're making, no matter what the medium is that you go through, what incubator, accelerator, program that you go through, just try to figure out who's going to pay for this and ascertain with as many data points as you can that they are going to pay for it. And most importantly, not just that they're going to pay for it, but why would you displace what they're currently using? Because that's usually an often, sort of forgotten aspect of it. Like people might be willing to pay for something, but how could you get them to stop paying for what they're currently paying for? And how would your product have that sort of displacing factor? I think in our case, just given that our technology is predicated on a platform, it kind of sells itself from the perspective of, hey, if you truly believe that you can design better drugs faster, regardless of the, modality, regardless of the target type, if you truly believe in that premise, then, it kind of sells itself. But then you have to go to the pharmaceutical companies with whom you'd likely be co-developing these assets and say, hey, what targets are top of mind for you? If I could crack a target for you, what would it be? So you can validate the utility of the platform in that way. So, but yeah, no, just make something people want, and I think that's really how I'd summarize it.
Great, thank you all so much for your time. This has been amazing. We're going to pivot over to Anna from NINDS for just the last wrap up.
Thank you so much, Taryn. Thank you so much to our panelists. This has been a wonderful first open stage webinar. We have 2 more lined up, so please check out our website for both the recording of this session if you missed any part of it, and also our next couple webinars. In March, we have a webinar on funding in fundamental neuroscience, and in April, we have presentation of the IGNITE program, which is innovation grants to nurture initial translational efforts. So we look forward to seeing you next time and stay connected with us. Thank you.
Thank you.